Welcome aboard, Giants fans, to episode 68 of Talk is Cheap, our New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. I'm Joe Giglio, joined as always by James Cratch and Dan Duggan. They cover the Giants for NJ Advanced Media. They're both still out in Minnesota. We're doing this podcast on a Tuesday morning, just hours after the Giants' 24-10 loss at the hands of the still undefeated Vikings. The Giants go down. They're now 2-2 on the season. We have a whole lot to talk about, including a wide receiver that's causing a whole bunch of negative headlines for the Giants right now. James, we'll start with you. That game, I think, was just frustrating for Giants fans to watch because although they lost by 2 touchdowns, they were never really out of it, but yet never really in it at the same time. It was a strange affair in which it felt like the Vikings just had control.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of what we talked about last week and what I expected. The Vikings dominated the game from start to finish, but their offense just isn't good enough to really pull away and make it a lopsided score. So the Giants hung in there and they had a little bit of life when they cut it to a touchdown in the fourth quarter, but at the end of the day, they just weren't good enough. I mean, the defense was okay. The offensive line, I thought, held up a lot better than anyone expected. They didn't give up a sack to a team that had 8 sacks against the Panthers a week before and led the league in sacks. But the offenses, they just weren't good enough. They couldn't make anything happen. Eli Manning did not have a good game. And, at the end of the day, when the defense finally had allowed the offense to pull within a score, Sam Bradford marches right down the field, and that was all she wrote. So just, and of course, the fumble early in the game kind of threw the Giants out of whack to begin with. So just not a good performance by the Giants. The Vikings are a vastly superior football team, in my opinion, but there's a lot to be concerned about right now.
Yeah, there has to be, right? And the Giants go from 2-0, and those first 2 wins, Dan, they were, by the skin of their teeth. And we gave them credit at that point for finding ways to win games. But you kind of added it in total now after 4 games. They barely won those first 2 games. They've now lost 2 in a row. They've been outscored through 4 games. It's not a pretty picture right now of a Giants team that I know there was a lot of optimism would be, greatly improved this year.
Right. I mean, I think you go back to those first 2 games. I mean, winning is winning, but when you're winning ugly, it's either going to turn around and you're going to finally start to click, or it's going to end up catching up to you, and it's clearly caught up to in these last 2 games. I think that's the biggest concern for me is this offense that we've talked up, the players have talked up, everybody has talked up, still is searching to actually have a game where they go off. I mean, 27 points is their highest output. 1 touchdown last night. They didn't even have an offensive touchdown against the Saints. Terrible defense. It's really kind of head-scratching now when you start to put the 4 games together. It's a little bit bigger sample size, and for whatever reason, this offense is just not clicking. It's the same offensive coordinator, obviously calling the plays as the head coach now. Pretty much the same players, except better ones in terms of Sterling Shepard and Victor Cruz. Joining an offense that was lighting up the last 2 years, so it's really hard to understand. I know defenses are doing a good job taking away the big plays, but there's always a kind of a push-pull factor. If they're taking away that, something else should be open, and it just seems like the Giants haven't been able to counter that. And with the weapons they have, it shouldn't be as much of a problem as it has been. Yeah,
it shouldn't. It's a mess right now. I mean, you look at some of these numbers, and they just. It's eye-opening. I mean, they've scored 73 points in 4 games, and that's the 3rd worst in the NFC. The only teams that have worse offenses right now in terms of points per game are the Los Angeles Rams, who start Case Keenum at quarterback, and the Chicago Bears, who've had Brian Hoyer out there for more than half of their season. So that's a problem. And then just on Monday night, I mean, Eli Manning threw for 261, but if you take away that screen pass where Paul Perkins made a great play, he's under 200 yards passing for the night. And James, we've gone, 2 or 3 minutes here in this podcast, and we're into the offense now. We have to bring the conversation to Odell Beckham Jr., and there's a lot of different ways we can go with this, but let's start with the production first and where it is and why he's not playing and catching passes and getting yards and touchdowns the way we've become accustomed to for 2 years. I mean, on Monday night, Odell Beckham Jr. had 3 catches for 23 yards. That's not what Giants fans are used to here.
No, career low for him. I thought that, and I don't know if you guys agree with me, I felt that for the first 3 weeks, the Beckham, he's not playing well, was a little bit overblown because I just thought he wasn't getting into the end zone. I thought his statistics and his targets and his catches and his yards, they were relatively they were pretty good. I just thought that the fact that Beckham had scored a touchdown, the fact that he has such high expectations given his level of play over his first 2 seasons, I thought maybe things were getting a little bit overblown. But last night was, I don't think Beckham had a target until 7 minutes left in the first half. he has 9 targets, 3 catches for 23 yards. He had a bad drop. Obviously, we're going to get to it in a second, but the emotions ran over again. He just wasn't really there, it seemed, on Monday night, and that's not a good thing for the Giants, and that's something that, they have to get the ball to those 3 playmakers, but they really have to get the ball to Beckham, and it's not happening.
It's not happening. And Dan, when you watch these games and you're watching Beckham, especially on Monday night, is this on him? Is this on McAdoo? Is this on Eli? Is this a team thing? I mean, there's been some fans that have been screaming and yelling all morning. You have to get him the ball, right? You have to get him the ball early, whether it be a screen or just get the ball in his hand early, and maybe that opens things up. I mean, where do we put the blame that Odell Beckham Jr. was basically non-existent in this Monday night game?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. I think last night, more than some of the other games, it's on him a bit, though, because he had chances to make plays. The interception wasn't his fault, but again, it's just a situation where you say, hey, throw it deep to Odell, and he kind of got tangled up with the corner, and obviously Eli, wasn't on the same page. Can't blame him for that. But then there was another deep ball in the second half where, Terrence Newman's running step for step with him. The ball's there. He kind of tries to make a one-handed catch, and we've all seen him make that plenty of times, but he can't reel it in. Again, that's what we've all been clamoring for. Just give him a chance. So then he has to then go and be, the Odell Beckham we've seen and make those plays. He also had a blatant drop on a routine out pass. So, we can't all sit here and say, get him the ball, and then he gets the opportunities. And on 9 targets, he has 3 catches. And again, some of those were not, catchable balls. Eli certainly didn't have a good game. But so I put a decent amount last night on Odell. But bigger picture, I think it's got to be the play calling, just the game planning. I just can't wrap my mind around the fact that you have one of the top 3 receivers in the league, however you want to order Julio Jones and Antonio Brown, and that he goes a quarter and a half without even getting a target. I mean, how difficult is it to draw up a quick play to get your best playmaker the ball? I don't care what coverage they're playing. There's ways to do it. I mean, I was thinking to myself, when you play a Monday night game, they get to watch all the games all week. He had to see what A.J. Green did on Thursday night. He obviously had to see what Julio Jones did on Sunday when you 300 yards. Everyone in the world saw that. And he has to be sitting there thinking, how can these teams that don't have as many weapons get the ball to their main guys, and I can't get it? So I think a big part of that is coaching. And then obviously the final part of the equation is Eli. I mean, he hasn't been that sharp this season. And he's, all about, I got to make my reads. Well, sometimes 13 just has to be the read because he's better than the guy he's, going against. Obviously, again, last night, it didn't really pan out that way. But there just needs to be a concerted effort to get him the ball, not to keep him happy, not any of that stuff, but because he's the best player on the field, pretty much every time he steps on the field. Like I said, all of the above. Last night, more Odell than usual, but I think probably the biggest problem is just more the play calling, the scheming, the coaching aspect.
How about you just call a reverse to the guy? Or put him in, just do something completely crazy and come out for the first play of the game and put him in the Wildcat. I mean,
does anyone ever stop a slant to him? I mean, you talk about all the soft coverage. Just throw slants to him all day. Eventually they'll have to come up. I mean, they try to make it seem so complicated. And yet, like I said, other teams find ways to get their best player the ball and those are defenses that don't have to scheme against Victor Cruz and Sterling Shepard. So it just can't be as difficult as they're making out to me. Again, I'm not in the film room, 16 hours a day, but it just seems like you got to find a way to get your best player the ball.
It does, and it felt like on Monday night, the Giants' offensive game plan, I don't even know what it was because half the plays, were busted within a half a second. It felt like Eli was just throwing the ball into the ground. So who knows how many of those would have gone to him, but I agree with both of you. I mean, get him the football any way you can, especially early, because as we're learning with him, and this has become more and more of a talking point over the last, 5-6 games of his career here, that, he wears his emotions on his sleeves when things are going well. That's a fun thing. I think Giants fans like to see that. When things aren't, it's becoming a detriment now to the team. I mean, we talked about this last week. James, I mean, we'd spent hours on this last year with the Panthers game, and now we sit here on this Tuesday morning after the Vikings game. Again, on Monday night against the Vikings, the Giants are struggling. He catches the pass near the sideline, not a long game, but just, finally something, and immediately unsportsmanlike conduct. And it looks to me like he's the one going after the defensive back to cause some sort of issue. Even if that was ticky-tack, he's the one, I don't know, he's just fired up or what it is, but he's making this issue what it is, and then he feels like he's targeted. James, what did you take away from the unsportsmanlike conduct? And then we'll get into all the reaction from the Giants.
it can't happen. I mean, look, and this is really becoming, I think, a major issue because it's, for whatever reason, it seems like there are so many people that just want to come up with excuse after excuse after excuse for this stuff, and all they want to do is blame McAdoo, blame Eli Manning. He shouldn't say this. He shouldn't say that. Look, here's the deal. Did Xavier Rhodes hit Odell late out of bounds? It looked like twice. Yes. Should they probably have thrown a flag for those hits? Yes. But they didn't. And look, not everything in an NFL game gets flagged. Remember, Odell earholed Kenny Vaccaro a couple weeks ago, and no one threw a flag for that. So that's – and I don't know if people saw us on the TV broadcast, but we saw it. A play or two before the play that led to the penalty, Rhodes and Beckham started going at each other, and you could tell they were yapping and going back and forth. And then that play happens. Odell, he got hit late out of bounds, but then he goes right up and gets in Rhodes' face. He makes contact with Rhodes. It was inadvertent, but he also seemed to kind of make contact with the official, although I don't know if it was clear if the official was trying to get in between the two of them or if Odell kind of grazed the official. I don't think that's really an issue, but that is something some people point out. But it has to stop at some point. You know, as you guys, many fans have seen reported, we saw it with our own two eyes last Monday night. Jerry Reese sat down with Odell at his locker for a very long period after the game. You saw a bunch of people on the Giants sideline go up to talk to. I mean, the offensive line coach Mike Solari talked to Odell for a second last night. They're doing everything they can, in my opinion. Although I do think they should have taken Beckham out of the game. I thought Ben made a mistake there. The Vikings took Xavier Rhodes out of the game. They said, okay, this is going to get out of hand if we don't get our guy off the field. I thought the Giants should have sat him down for at least a play or two. But, it's just, this is a problem. I think it's clear. I mean, look, Jerry Reese is not going to sit down with him in his locker if the Giants don't think it's a problem. Because if Jerry's sitting down with him, there's only one step left, and that's he goes to John Mara's office and has a talk with the owner. So, but I just don't understand why people keep on. I understand Dan's right. I think he is an intense competitor. He wants to win. He's not getting emotional because he's not getting the ball. He's getting emotional because the team's not having success, which is a good thing. But at the same time, he has to channel these emotions in a more productive, positive manner. And it's not happening. And it's a major concern. And people need to realize that it's okay to say that Odell Beckham is a great player who has to control his emotions. They do not have to be exclusive.
Oh, they don't have to be exclusive, James. And I think, to me, the big issue is, all right, look, if he was getting 7 catches for 150 yards and a touchdown or two every game, and then there was 1 or 2 plays per game where he had some sort of antic, or maybe there was an unnecessary roughness or a taunting, I think everyone would probably just shake it off and say, it's Odell being Odell. But I feel like it gets in his head for other plays. I mean, I don't know the play. I don't know what his route was supposed to be. But all I know is I watched the interception Eli threw last night when the ball went deep, and it reminded me of last year against the Panthers, where I felt like he didn't run the right route, or maybe he and Eli were on the same page, because it felt like, just watching the game on Monday night, I mean, was Odell? Am I the only one that feel like Odell was trying to create contact with the defensive back on that play instead of just get past them? Sometimes I feel like he takes everything and moves it into other parts of the game, and that could be hurting the offense, even more than just a 15-yard penalty. Dan, what did you see on that interception, and do you think that he takes it into other plays, not just the ones he maybe gets a flag for?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, not even so much on the interception, the play after the penalty, I know I did see the replay in the press box. He clearly went out and basically just his decision was, I'm going to smash into Xavier Rhodes and then find out what my route is. And, he kind of got lucky. He didn't get, an offensive pass interference or illegal hands to the face, whatever it could have been there. And Eli found him. And then, of course, there was another little, collision out of bounds. But it seemed like his first mission on that route was, I'm going to go get even with this guy, which there's something to be said for just kind of rising above it. I know that's easier said than done. And, he pointed out last night he's a 23-year-old. But he just has it in his head that he has to avenge everything that ever happens. And again, I'm obviously coming from a fresh perspective where I didn't watch every game the guy played last 2 years. So, I saw the highlights, saw some games here or there. But I don't know if this really started in earnest after the whole Josh Norman thing where, his manhood got called into question. But you get bumped out of bounds in the second quarter. I mean, why do you need to go get in the guy's face? And again, he's making these quotes about it's a man's game, and I have to stand up for myself. Just go back to the huddle. I mean, it's what did he accomplish by giving a little chest bump to Rhodes? And again, as you said, it seems to get him off of his game. So I just think he needs to, and it's going to be hard for him to do because he is a competitive guy, and there is the macho factor obviously on the field in an NFL game, but. Again, I just go to other receivers around the league. You don't see all this nonsense after the play, and now it's just snowballing now because now the refs are more heightened to everything Beckham does. Opponents clearly are trying to get under his skin, and why wouldn't you? It's the best way to stop the guy because obviously, talent-wise, it's tough to stop him. But if you can get him off his game, like we're saying, it seems to have happened last night. It seems to happen pretty much every game now where he's just getting distracted by some nonsense. You go back to that Saints, cheap shot he had against Kenny Vaccaro. It's just, I don't understand why he feels he needs to prove, himself and his toughness or whatnot. Just go burn everybody like you were doing for 2 years and everyone loved you. I mean, nobody wants, the NFL does not want Odell Beckham to be a villain. I mean, after that catch against the Cowboys, this guy was, the most marketable guy in the league, and all of a sudden he's decided everyone's out to get him, which I don't understand where all that comes from. And again, he's a young guy, and I don't think anyone's going to probably be able to tell him otherwise. Maybe that's what Jerry Reese was trying to do, but he's certainly not the first guy to try and talk some sense into Odell about this. And it just seems like he's so set in his ways that he needs to play with this wild emotional edge. I mean, look at Victor Cruz on the other side. He's obviously been a great player in this league, and he's the guy everyone's always, helping him up and, patting him on the butt on the way back to the huddle. It doesn't seem to hurt his play. So, I mean, I know everyone's wired differently, but he just needs to get it under control one way or another.
Yeah, I don't understand this whole, this whole everyone's out. I mean, the guy's had 6 oral histories written about him in his catch so far in his career. He's 23 years old. It's just, Dan is absolutely right. This guy is, he plays in New York. He's one of the best players in the league. He's a generational talent. And I think that's part of the problem, that people they don't seem to think that they can criticize him. But look, I don't think this is a major, fans are on Twitter saying, is he going to leave New York? Are the Giants going to trade him? Everybody needs to calm down. Okay, this is not a major issue. This is not a franchise-defining issue. It's an issue that's very easily fixed if he, as Dan said, just puts his head down and jogs back to the huddle. But the bottom line is, I think you're absolutely right, Joe. I don't know about that play in particular, but last year he didn't get a lot of targets for a big period of the Panthers game because I don't think Eli Manning would ever come out and say it, but he's probably sitting there thinking, I can't throw the ball to this crazy guy. He's throwing a punch at Josh Norman every play. How am I going to throw him the football? So, there were times where he wouldn't even get open. The ball would be snapped and he would just try to fight Josh Norman. It's just, look, it's an issue. It's not a major issue. It's an issue that can be fixed. Ben McAdoo loves to say that every issue the Giants have can be fixed. This is something that can be fixed, but it has to get fixed soon because if it doesn't get fixed, he's either going to get ejected from the game or the NFL is going to say, you know what, you need to sit down again and be suspended because this is a cumulative issue.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is the third time in 8 games we're talking about this. I mean, last year, like you just said, James, there were plays in the Panther game, which they ended up losing because Cam Newton went crazy in the fourth quarter, but plays in the Panther game that he was taking himself out of the play because of wherever his head was, did it last night in the Monday night game against the Vikings, was suspended last year for the Vikings game because of what he did in the Panther game. I mean, I agree with you that this can be fixed. This doesn't have to ruin his career. I mean, his talent is off the charts. He's had 2 of the greatest seasons any receiver's ever had to start a career. But at some point here, I mean, this is becoming a detriment to the Giants trying to win football games, and he should be the opposite of that, right, Dan? I mean, he should be the biggest wild card and X factor they have, that they can beat anybody or compete with anybody in the league because of him, and he's reversing that when he acts like this.
Right, and the thing about it is he's a smart guy. Like, if he was just some kind of dummy who just has a hot head and didn't understand his perception and everything like that, you'd just say, well, you kind of got to live with it. Obviously, there's plenty of guys across the various sports who, they're just going to be them, and then, Ron Artest type guys who I don't think maybe have the same awareness, we'll say, that Odell does. But Beckham's aware of everything. I mean, he's clearly a very sensitive guy. I mean, he puts all these things out on social media about all his critics and all that type of stuff. And that's the type of stuff a sensitive type of person does. I mean, I don't think he'd admit that, but I mean, most guys would just probably ignore it. And he kind of feels compelled to respond to so much of the noise. So yeah, I just think that's what's frustrating, I guess, from the Giants' perspective, is this is a smart guy, and he should be able to understand that he can control this. He's saying, "Oh, it's basically out of my hands. It's all against me. It's all against me." And someone even asked him last night, "Well, don't you think you've brought some of this on?" I mean, obviously that Josh Norman game was such an ugly thing that everyone's seen, and like I said, it heightened refs to everything Odell does, and it obviously made opponents more aware that they can get in this guy's head and get under his skin. And he kind of dismissed even that, like, oh, it doesn't matter if I brought it on. It's they're still gonna come after me. But he's ignoring a step there that, well, if you don't give them something to throw flags on, again, he probably doesn't think he deserved a flag for what he did last night. Certainly debatable, but he's removed all the shadow, the benefit of the doubt because of the actions he's had in the past. And again, I just think if he can kind of connect all these things in his mind, that I don't have to answer every time I get a little bit of a cheap shot. If I just play my game, the refs, I kind of take that variable out of the equation. And again, the fact that I think he's a smart enough guy, at some point you got to think it's going to click. He is only 23, but like I said earlier, it's snowballing. So it's only going to get worse if he doesn't nip it in the bud himself. Everyone in the world can talk to him. He needs to kind of come to some realization that the way this is going, and then pointing the finger outward, never really pointing it inward, it's only going to get worse unless something changes there.
Yeah, and unfortunately for the Giants, they have a big stretch of games here where they have to win and they have to get back on track, and they have to figure this out too. Before we get into talking about some level of concern of other issues around the Giants, because it's not just Odell Beckham that they've lost these last two games. James, let's wrap the Odell part of this podcast, which we might have to have again in a couple weeks, with moving forward. How do you think the Giants continue to handle this? I mean, you think it'll be a McAdoo, Eli thing? And Eli talked last night after the game and basically said, look, he's bringing this upon himself. Beckham seems to think it's being brought upon him. I mean, internally, how do you think the Giants handle this? Or do they just kind of go about their business and hope he doesn't do this again?
I think they're going to handle it kind of the way they have been handling it. Look, I think that the bottom line is, and I know Dan was on the beat last year, Tom Coughlin did not get fired because Odell lost his cool against the Panthers. But that did not help. And I really felt that the issue with Beckham was kind of I don't want to say the last straw, but it was if there was any doubt, I think, in anyone's mind going into that day that the Giants had to make a coaching change, I think that the Panthers game and the way it was handled and the way Tom just seemed to not even get what had happened after the game. And then the fact that the Giants went out there without Beckham against the Vikings in Week 16 and were just an embarrassment on national television. That was kind of that was the point of no return. I think Ben McAdoo is a first-year head coach. He's got a lot of eyeballs on him. He's got a lot of scrutiny. He's getting a lot of heat now because they've lost two straight, and the offense, which is his thing, is not playing well. He is not going to let this thing get out of hand. He's going to be in control. I think Eli's been – the way Eli doesn't really get as much attention because Eli kind of says it very, nonchalantly, very plainly. But I think Eli's made it very clear with his public comments, which, in my opinion – and tell me if you guys agree with me, have been the most consistent of anybody around the Giants about the situation.
I agree with that. Yeah,
he's had enough of this. He said it
the way he felt the whole time, yeah.
I think Eli's had enough of this. I think that's pretty clear, and I think you're going to continue to see that. He's had enough. He thinks this needs to end, and he wants it to end now. I think they're going to keep doing it. I think you're going to still see guys talk to him. You can't just blame the other team and the officials and this other thing, which is starting to happen, where it's social media, it's the media. I mean, no, it's not. We the media, the social. I mean, they have an on-field issue. He's the guy who went and bumped Xavier Rhodes and got a penalty. No one made him do that. I think the Giants are going to keep on approaching this the way they are. And they just have to hope that – I mean, and look, to Beckham's credit, against the Redskins, he didn't have any on-field issues. In this game, he had an on-field issue, but he also seemed to get under control from there. And, him and Xavier Rhodes, I think they helped each other up in the second half, So there are small – their progress is being made, no doubt. there are, look, Odell's not a bad guy. I think a lot of people saw it. He went over and shook the hand of all the servicemen and servicewomen at the game on Monday night. He's making progress, but he's just not making, I don't want to say enough progress. It's not coming all the way around. And the Giants need it to come all the way around now. They really can't keep doing this each week.
Yeah,
No,
I just want to
can't.
jump in. That point you just made is kind of supporting what I'm saying. He did the thing with the soldiers, shaking their hands. He made a great block on Perkins' screen, helped Rhodes up after play. So he's capable of it. Again, that goes back just to what I'm saying. It's not like this is a lost cause. Like, hey, listen, you got to just deal with this guy. He's a knucklehead. He just loses his cool. So that's something that I feel like you can rein in. Whereas if he was just a complete live wire and totally unpredictable, but he shows enough awareness in other situations that you just feel like, can he just translate that to everything on the field rather than, losing his cool for 5 minutes? Because even on the sideline last night, he didn't have a tantrum. He did have one after the drive with the penalty. He did his thing where he paces away, and it just looks bad because all the other wide receivers are sitting with their position coach, obviously going over routes, going over what's working, what's not, and he's 50 yards away talking to Mark Herzlich, who's trying to get him under control. But later in the game, after the interception, I believe, or after the last possession where the game was pretty much over, he just went, sat on the sideline, didn't make a scene. So I mean, there's definitely times where I think it's a maturity issue, and I think again he's young. You see enough signs that gives you hope that he can fix this issue that seems to be becoming a bigger one every week. But I don't think it's a complete lost cause by any stretch at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, he's still a young player, and he's obviously a brilliant player, but this is obviously a storyline. And to go to your last point, Dan, I mean, the ESPN cameras or whatever, Fox, NBC, whatever channel they're on in each different week, I mean, it becomes a bigger thing for everyone at home because they know right away. They're going to pan to him on the sideline whenever he comes off the field, but especially if the Giants are struggling and then everyone sees it and all of a sudden it becomes a big thing. All right, so Odell Beckham Jr., the major story, the Giants are 2-2. They have other issues. All right, we have 6. We're going to play a little game here. Your level of concern, and you guys could choose between low, medium, and high. So we have 6 of these. I'll give 2 each, or 3 to each of you, and we'll kind of figure out how concerned we should be, how concerned you guys are with these different areas team. All right, we'll start with you, James. We'll go with this one. The defense has generated 0 turnovers through 4 games. They spent a lot of money, and some of these guys have played well individually. It hasn't been a bad defense, but 0 turnovers generated through 4 games. Your level of concern, low, medium, high?
High concern. You cannot win in the National Football League if you don't have takeaways. You cannot win in the National Football League if you have a negative turnover differential. They got to start getting the ball. Last night, in my opinion, was a game where they were not going to win unless they had takeaways because that Minnesota defense is so good that you need to have a defensive score. You need to have a special team score. You need to set the offense up on a short field with a chance to get a cheap touchdown. They didn't do that. They lost the game. And I look at the upcoming schedule: the Packers, the Ravens, the Rams, the Eagles, the Bengals. More of the same. It gives you a chance. The Giants' offense, I think, is like 6th overall in yards per game, and they're like 27th in points scored. They're averaging, I think, 18.25 points a game because they're never on a short field. They have to go 75, 80 yards every time.
They do, and that's not easy to do, especially when you have receivers that get penalties. I mean, they have a lot of things going against them. The fact they're not generating turnovers is not helping. Dan, we'll go with this one for you. To stay with the defense, Olivier Vernon, who I think is hustled. I think he's been involved in a lot of plays, played the run well, but through 4 games, his first 4 games, the Giant has recorded just 1 sack. Level of concern, low, medium, or high with Olivier Vernon and his 1 sack so far?
I'd say medium, but almost I'll go like in a steak level, medium low, because I just don't, you can't measure a defensive end strictly on sacks. I felt like he was in the backfield a decent amount last night. Caused a couple of pressures. I know he forced Bradford to throw the ball away at one point. Obviously, you want to see some sacks, and listen, it doesn't affect the play on the field, but when you have that contract, the expectations are going to raise, whether that's right or wrong. So you got to live up to that. And that's something that he definitely hasn't done that so far because, again, you see guys around the league who are making big money who, maybe have 4 or 5 sacks right now. So it's a little bit of a concern. But, again, you said it. He's playing very well against the run. It's not like he looks overmatched out there and you're like, how did you give this guy money? It's just he hasn't, finished plays and got the big strip sack that, as you guys were just talking about in that last part, they desperately need. But I wouldn't say he's a bust or anything like that. And just like the takeaways, maybe the sacks will come in bunches for him. But I think he's played pretty well. So I wouldn't say it's a big concern for me.
James, for you, let's go to this one. Ben McAdoo's play calling so far this season, and a lot of Giants fans, I see it on social media and just during these games, are not happy with it. I mean, when you're not scoring points, people are going to be unhappy with the play caller. I understand that. But your thoughts, low, medium, high, concern level with how McAdoo's called these plays through 4 games?
Medium. I think that it's definitely a concern. I saw some people on Twitter, back to the kind of the vein of trade Odell, or they can trade Odell, does McAdoo need to give up the play calling duties? We're 4 games in. It's a little early for that, but, McAdoo has had success as a play caller, as an offensive coordinator for the Giants, but I definitely think that there's been some curious calls, they abandoned the run against the Redskins. They, do some things here and there. Clock management was a little iffy last night. So I would say medium. I think that there definitely is room for improvement, but I don't think that's at the top of the Giants' issue list at this point.
No, it probably isn't, but the output so far hasn't been good. And Dan, let's go to Eli now. And once in a while when the Giants don't play well, some will bring it back to Eli. That doesn't usually happen unless he has one of those really bad games that he has every once in a while. But, Beckham was a story last night. The offensive line has been great. They don't have their running backs. But again, when you have a quarterback make it as much as Eli, people expect more than he's given the last 2 games. 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions over the last 3 games. Came in with a good completion percentage. Monday night wasn't very good. Your concern level with Eli's play in total so far this season, low, medium, high?
I'll go medium. He hasn't been playing well, or at least not as well as he's capable of playing. But at the same time, this is kind of the Eli experience. I mean, he wouldn't be Eli if he went out and had 16 great games. I mean, you also know he's liable to go out and throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns next week, because he's always kind of been a roller coaster type of guy. If we're just looking at last night's performance, like I said, I thought it was really disappointing because I thought the offensive line did a great job. I mean, I know that pressures are sort of a tough stat to track, and he certainly did have some guys in his face at times, but they didn't give up a sack to a team that had 8 sacks last week against Cam Newton. So there was enough time to make some plays, and again, the fact that you have these 3 wide receivers and he and the coaching staff can't figure out a way to get them the ball more is kind of it's really mind numbing. I don't understand what's going on there. He has the yardage though. Obviously, the touchdowns is eluding the offense in general, and him in particular. Needs to figure out a way to convert. But I think a lot of it comes down to just not making big plays. It's tough to just nickel and dime your way down the field on 6-yard passes, 8-yard passes, because eventually the defense is going to make a play, or you're going to make a mistake, or you're going to get stopped on 3rd and short. So, the offense obviously isn't clicking. That starts with Eli. But again, I don't think you can ever get too high or too low, just like Eli never gets too high or too low. So I'll give him a medium.
I think that's about right. That fits the personality of Eli Manning. 2 more, one for each of you guys on the level of concern with the 2-2 Giants, and then we'll look forward to Sunday night in Green Bay. James, we'll go to schedule with you moving forward here. The one thing that pops out, and you've talked about this a lot, James, this portion of the schedule, but beyond this, right? They'll be in Green Bay, and then you look into the rest of October. Suddenly, I mean, it's not really surprising to see the Ravens at 3-1. When Flacco's healthy, that's usually a good football team. But suddenly that Rams game in London doesn't look as easy as it did maybe, say, after week 1 when the Rams looked like just a complete joke. They're 3-1 now. They just went to Arizona and won. So level of concern with the schedule moving forward, starting with Green Bay this week.
High. I would say extra high if you gave me that as an option. So they're going to Green Bay on Sunday night. A lot of fans and some media members have kind of had this thing that the Packers was the winnable game. I don't agree with that at all. I think that the Giants are significant underdogs against the Packers. I thought the Vikings were the winnable game because the Vikings' offense isn't very good. The Packers, I think that's a tough matchup for the Giants, and I'm not picking the Giants this week, and I have a feeling it could get ugly on Sunday night at Lambeau. But then, as you said, Ravens, Rams in London, bye week, home against the Eagles, who will probably be undefeated at that point, still the way everything's going for Wentz-mania in Philly. Then the Bengals on Monday Night Football. it gets a little bit easier. You have the Bears and then the Browns Thanksgiving weekend, but then you got to go to the Steelers. Then you got the Cowboys at home. Then you have the Lions at Philly, at Washington. That's not an easy schedule. I think fans seem to think in the offseason it was an easy schedule, and I was saying, no, this is kind of a tough schedule. It's even tougher than I thought it was going to be because some of those teams are off to surprising starts. This could get out of hand quick. The Giants really have to right their ship and quickly because they're not going to play any gimme games, I think, until – and I don't even think the Bears and the Browns are gimme games. I picked the Bears to make the playoffs, which was really dumb, but I do think there's some talent there. And the Browns have been feisty every week, so going to Cleveland on Thanksgiving weekend is not a pushover. So if the Giants don't get their act in order right now, they could take on some losses.
They could, and 2 in a row heading to Green Bay. Dan, we'll end with the concern question with injuries for you. Your level of concern over the injuries. Last night during the Monday night broadcast, we're doing this podcast on a Tuesday morning, John Gruden was going on and on about they didn't have their running backs, they don't have a fullback on the roster, which I don't know why he mentioned so often. They don't have a blocking tight end, but really the Giant injuries, the secondary was a big issue, of course, last night as well because they didn't have their safeties out there, they didn't have Cromartie, on the field actually, he was just standing around. Your level of concern with the injury is something that always seems to be part of this conversation with the Giants.
I mean, I'll say medium. Obviously, Vereen is a big loss, but he's the only guy out for the season. I mean, medium, I guess, with the right to go higher if some of these guys are out longer than maybe we think. I mean, hard to really figure what's going on for Rashad Jennings. This is 2 weeks in a row where he's been a limited participant in practice all week and then not able to play. So, I know I've had fans ask me on Twitter, is this something more serious going on? Nothing that I've seen or heard indicates that. Again, because why would he be out there practicing if there was something more serious? But a little bit of a head scratcher that he's been out now for 2 weeks despite being able to be on the practice field. So, I mean, I would assume he will be back. Although the running backs, I thought, was probably the bright spot of the offense last night. That was a great run defense, and they were able to run the ball for 4.3 yards a carry. So I can't say they missed Jennings terribly last night, although maybe some of the pass protection and things like that he would have helped. But obviously the bigger issue is definitely on the other side of the ball in the secondary. Darian Thompson got, relatively good news last week when it, wasn't a major injury that's going to require surgery, but he's still in a week-to-week window. So, you've heard different reports that maybe it'll be the Ravens game, maybe it'll be the week after that. He's still in a walking boot, so I don't know how optimistic you can be. Again, good thing he avoided major surgery, but they need him back desperately. This pass defense just does not look as good without him on the field. Nat Berhe with a concussion, always tough to predict that, but maybe there's a chance he'll be back next week, which I think would help. And then the corners, it seems like both of those guys should, in Rogers Cromartie and Eli Apple should be ready to go next week. I mean, the fact that Rogers Cromartie was at least healthy enough to dress, obviously didn't get in the game, is a promising sign for where he's at. So if they're out for a long term, it's high red alert, sirens going off. But the fact that I think that none of these guys are going to be out for too long of a period of time, I don't think it's a major concern.
All right, guys, let's look forward. Sunday Night Football, the Giants in Green Bay against the Packers. Second straight road game. Second straight game against a playoff team from last year. Second road trip in a row for you guys out to the Midwest. James, when you look at this matchup, but you touched on it a few minutes ago, what do you see? I mean, the Packers, they're 2-1 coming off a bye. All three of their games have been close. I'm not sure what to make of them yet, other than, what we know about Aaron Rodgers and what we usually can expect out of them.
I think one of the major things that stand out to me is the Giants are on a short week after playing a really physical game against the Minnesota Vikings and their elite defense, and the Packers are coming off a bye. I think that could be a major difference, especially with the Giants making a road trip again. I think this is going to be a really tough game for the Giants. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers. I know that things have been kind of up and down in Green Bay, but I think as someone pointed out, I read somewhere, the Packers basically didn't do anything in the preseason. They basically treated it like a joke and barely played their starting offense. So they're kind of working their way into a groove. And the Giants defense, I mean, if they're not healthy in the secondary, they're going to be susceptible to big plays again. And I'm looking up the stats right now, but the Green Bay defense is kind of a middle of the pack unit. I think it still is the league's top ranked rush defense. So, The Giants' run game has been kind of resurgent a little bit quietly the past couple of weeks, but I don't know if that's going to end in Green Bay against the Packers. So I just think it's a really tough matchup for the Giants, kind of a perfect storm matchup. And, yeah, they could definitely stay in the game and give the Packers a run, but I think there's a very good chance that the Packers are going to blow them out.
Dan, what are you feeling as we look forward to Packers-Giants Sunday Night Football?
Yeah, I mean, I agree it's a tough matchup, and go back to my last point. If these guys in the secondary aren't healthy, then obviously this matchup gets a lot more difficult. The one thing you know about the Packers is they're going to be able to throw the ball around with Aaron Rodgers and those wide receivers. So it's a never easy place to go into play at Lambeau, especially in prime time. I'm sure that place will be rocking, although it can't be any louder than it was last night at the Vikings' new stadium. That place was, you could barely hear yourself think. So, yeah, no, definitely a tough matchup. And no surprise, when we looked at the schedule when it came out and these two games were circled as, this is really the gauntlet right here. I mean, I think most people, even myself, I predicted them to win. I don't even know if it was 9 or 10 games now. I can't remember. But I thought they'd be 2-3 after this stretch. And that certainly looks like, where they're headed. So certainly not an ideal setup, as James said, short week, travel back late last night and got to get back on a plane and head back out to the Midwest on Saturday for Sunday's game. But hey, this is life in the NFL. You know what I mean? There's not too many. You can't schedule a 1AA team to get your bearings. It's how it is. It's a tough stretch. Like I said, they just need to get some guys healthy because otherwise it could be a really rough matchup.
It could, and here we go. Giants-Packers with a 2-game losing streak going in, and the Sunday Night Football cameras on Odell Beckham. It should be a fun scene. We'll be back next week to talk about it, either a 3-game losing streak, which will have everyone just up in arms, or the Giants bounce back with a huge win against a really good NFC team. So we'll talk about it next week. James, as always, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Joe.
And thank you, Dan.
Hey, thanks a lot, Joe.
We'll be back next week. Thanks so much for listening to episode 68 of Talk is Cheap. You can always listen and subscribe on NJ.com, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iTunes. Any way you want to listen, you can listen to our Giants podcast, Talk is Cheap, right here on NJ.com.